All right. Well, thanks so much for that warm introduction, and thank you everybody for taking time out of your day to join us. My name is Jerry Silverman, and today we're going to be talking about creativity and design-led innovation in the public sector. You can get a hold of me via my Twitter handle, which is Jerome Silverman, and I'm a Principal Solutions Consultant with Adobe Systems Federal. I've been with this group for almost 5 years, and today I'm going to be presenting the results of a survey that we conducted on government creatives, government communications professionals, visual information managers, and those who work in the business of creativity in government. We have a number of great resources lined up that I hope to be able to share with you. And I also want to acknowledge the contributions of a couple of folks who work in government who I was very fortunate to have a great dialogue with earlier in the year. And these folks are Lakshmi Grama, who is the Acting Associate Director for Dissemination Digital Communications at the National Cancer Institute, and that's her Twitter handle down there if you want to get in touch with her. And Carolyn Dew, who is a user experience designer at the 18F, which is an agency of the GSA, and that's her Twitter handle there. So these two excellent contributors have helped me to put together some of the information that we're going to be going over. And we presented this information actually last week at the Adobe Digital Government Assembly in Washington, D.C., where we had over 1,100 customers and partners. It was our 7th annual Digital Government Assembly and probably our biggest and strongest since. And so we presented a lot of the insights that you're going to see today there live in that session. And I wanted to encourage you, if you're going through and recapping our session today and you want to get more insight into all of the different Adobe solutions and kind of get a full broad perspective on what happened at this government assembly, which again is probably one of the biggest digital government conferences globally that exists. So I would encourage you to go to adobedigitalgovernment.com/wrap-up, and you can get all of the different presentations that were given. You can get the slides, you can get photos, you can get recordings of the actual event, and a lot of good wrap-up. There were some pretty amazing guest stars who came forward for that event. So just wanted to encourage you to take a look there. And so what we presented during our creativity and design-led innovation session was kind of a picture of what creativity looks like across different industries and different vertical markets. And there was a poll in 2014 by Forrester Research called the Creative Dividend that looked at how businesses benefit from implementing creativity in their everyday workforce practice, right? Not how many designers do they hire versus how many creative types do they have, but just looking at the overall process of being more creative in business. And so in that poll, which was across about 1,500 people in different industries, one of the first questions that they asked was, how do you actually define creativity? What does it mean? I think there's a lot of misconception around what creativity can mean in business. And so these, just bringing up on the screen, are some of the prime examples that survey brought up. And so I think we'll probably take a bunch of these forward, kind of moving forward into today, but an iterative capability, right? Iterating. That's something that many folks who are professional creatives understand natively. Is your first, the first time you try something is never the final. You never get it right on the first try. You always have to, scrumple up the piece of paper and start over, or you're always adding. When there's a culture based in learning, is one of the, and training is a great catalyst for creativity. Diverse employee backgrounds, I can say working at Adobe, which is a very diverse company, that I can say that contributes very positively to folks thinking creatively. But also ability to wear different hats, right? Knowing a little bit about multiple disciplines, right? Having a multidisciplinary focus can also lead to more creativity when you're synthesizing ideas from one side of the business to the other. When you're putting together the arts and the sciences, that can lead to creativity. And reinvention, and understanding that innovation or creation can actually happen from anywhere, not just in the marketing department or the communications department. So these are the definitions that Forrester pulled out of their survey recipients. But I think it's important, before we move forward, to talk about what the difference is between creativity and innovation. Creative doesn't mean that it actually innovates. And so if you kind of distill down that list of definitions that we had in the first slide, I think we could probably say that creativity is the production of novel and useful ideas in any domain, but innovation is when you successfully implement those creative ideas. So it's not enough to have a bunch of great ideas. You actually have to make those ideas work, and you have to make them happen. And this is actually a quotation from a Harvard Business School professor on her study, Creativity and Innovation in Organizations. So I think, again, it's not about the 99% of ideas. It's about that 1% getting over the line in execution. So when I asked our panelists how they had seen the definition of creativity changing in government, so Lakshmi had a couple of great pull quotes that I wanted to pull up. So she said that creativity, again, may have been the domain of a chosen few, right? The enlightened designer class, the people who, scientists don't touch in terms of design because they might be put up on the pedestal as understanding color and typography and, the rules of layout. But because knowledge has become so democratized, you can see creativity becoming ever more diffused within an organization. So that's very encouraging. And again, understanding that across different places in an organization that there's creativity, whether it's from peers or colleagues or anyone who wants to positively impact their work, we actually see that changing a lot in government, and it's becoming more of a buzzword, creativity. So much so that last year, the Adobe government and public sector team put together an awards challenge for any federal, state, defense, or agency across the United States and Canada to contribute their very best work to Adobe, to our Behance page. And if you're not familiar with Behance, it is the premier online community of creative designers, illustrators, photographers, anyone involved in the production of graphics or production of multimedia. And we issued that challenge saying submit it and we will honor you at the Adobe Max awards presentation in October in Los Angeles, and you'll get a trophy and we'll put you up on a special site to recognize you and give you honor. So we realize that creativity is getting across the public sector a lot, and some of the winners included the U.S. Capitol Rotunda App, which was made by the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center and Office of the Architect of the U.S. Capitol. So just to give you an idea of what this app looked like, I really like this app a lot. I think it's really cool. So I actually have it pulled up here on my iPad to show you a great example. So I'm going to go ahead and launch it up. This is the official iOS app. And as you can see right away, there's kind of some lovely transitions, and it kind of gets you in the mood to explore. It gives you beautiful imagery, beautiful typography and color and motion. And so when I say get started by just swiping, immediately I'm taken to really gorgeous composition telling me all about the rotunda. I can swipe up and get some nice imagery. I've got a nice little pull tab if I want to learn a little bit more about the history of the rotunda. I've got that nice little interactive piece. I can, oops, swiped a little too hard there. If I swipe this image to kind of get an idea of how the dome looked while it was being constructed or what the idea was, to look at the interior versus the exterior, and I'm just tapping and swiping my finger there to get that rollover kind of layout. So that's very nice. I've got a bunch of different applications of what is done in the Capitol Rotunda. So there are gold medal ceremonies, there are statue unveilings, and I can look at what some of those unveilings actually look like, some photography of the statue unveilings. We can take a look at some folks who were laid to honor in the Rotunda and pull out and learn about those folks, right? We can learn about Rosa Parks and her statue that's in there. And so now if I kind of come out a little bit more, I actually get a 360-degree view of the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. So I can just pan with my finger and look up and kind of go up and take a look at what's in the Rotunda, and I can also look at the southwest view and pull up details and data about what the paintings are, what the sculptures are. So I see the Declaration of Independence. I see Alexander Hamilton, right, our first Secretary of Treasury, who also happens to have a Broadway musical about him right now. So this is just one look into one of the winners, and I think you can see why Adobe chose this as its kind of premier winner for citizen engagement. So we gave an award to cancer.gov, which was completely redesigned and is now totally responsive and looks beautiful and is much more usable, user-friendly, searchable. And I think we found that Lakshmi, who was the kind of associate director of this project while it was happening, said that they went from 24,000 pages down to something like 6,000. So they really reduced the amount of clutter on their site and made it beautiful, intuitive, and the user experience is really very much better. So one of our other winners was Airman Magazine, and this is put out by the Defense Media Activity in Fort Meade, Maryland. And so this project is part of a, when we look at the addition by subtraction article, it was all about wounded warriors and how they come back and re-enter the workforce and re-enter society after being honored war fighters. And so very compelling content, beautifully laid out, and also in that kind of digital magazine format that we saw with the Architect of the Capitol app, very interactive, very animated, using best practices in design. Our best integrated and cross-channel campaign went to the city of Kansas City, Missouri, who took a lot of their open data from the API that they make available to all of their different government agencies around every statistic you could imagine in the city, and created an interactive multimedia sculpture exhibition in a gallery and invited the public to come view their data as sculpture. And so I thought that was a really out-of-the-box way of visualizing data, especially when it's typically locked up in a PowerPoint or in an Excel worksheet. The U.S. Forest Services did a wonderful rebrand across their entire portfolio of going everywhere from websites and publications to signage in national parks to park ranger clothing and vestige, all the way through their entire brand portfolio. They did a magnificent job, and they were actually the Adobe Community Choice because everybody who voted in this awards challenge, they gave the majority of votes to Forest Services. So if your agency is creating exceptional work or is even creating work that you would want to contribute to the Behance site and enter our 2016 awards challenge, which will, the winners of which will get announced in the fall, then I'd like to encourage you to go on to behance.net/creativity in public sector and start up a profile for yourself and submit your agency's work. It's free of charge, and it'll be a great way to get the name of your agency out there into the world. And you can also browse and get inspiration from hundreds of other government agencies who are creating exceptional creative work. So hope that you've seen some good examples out there. Now, Carolyn and Lakshmi, when I was interviewing them during our session last week, they had a couple of favorite sites that are live now that I think you'd be interested in seeing. The new Health and Human Services website, hhs.gov, has done a similar type of rebranding and simplification that you saw with cancer.gov, cancer.gov being a smaller website underneath the HHS umbrella. So Lakshmi really recommends that one, as well as the streamlining that the federal student aid system has undergone, making that process a lot more fluid and usable and responsive to the needs of parents and students. So you can also take a look at the beta of the new Veterans Administration home site, which is vets.gov. Again, that's the beta. It's not va.gov. And this is being put together by the 18F, a project where they're trying to radically streamline how VA, the front end of VA services is architected. So I encourage you to go take a look at that, as well as the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Carolyn mentioned that the Department of Interior had a really great social media presence and was quote-unquote killing it on social media. So that's their Twitter handle right there. And they've actually got some really interesting campaigns going on, one of which is called Every Kid in a Park. So if you're a parent of a fourth grader or a rising fourth grader, you can send your kid to this government website, which again was designed using the 18F and the General Services Administration, to get them a free pass to any national park in America, especially the ones that are closest to where that kid happens to live. But I actually have a rising fourth grader, so I went onto that site and walked it through with my rising fourth grader, and she's very excited to check that out and get her free pass. So these are really well designed. Now, when it comes to my pick for what I think is something very compelling, so the 18F and the GSA have recently introduced these U.S. web design standards. And so if you go to playbook.cia.gov/design standards and check that out, basically what this is a set of open source user interface components and a visual style guide, which is going to help web designers and developers create consistency and really stand out user experiences like you might have seen with some of those other projects that I just brought up, right? So these web design standards and the style guide and the UI components are built and maintained by the U.S. Digital Service and the 18F, and it follows industry standard web accessibility guidelines and reuses a lot of the best practices of existing libraries that you might come across, as well as modern web design methods. So this is basically your key to, and your guide for creating beautiful, easy-to-use online experiences for your constituency. So I highly recommend you check that out. Now Adobe, out of curiosity, I do work for Adobe, so I do feel obligated to mention that we recently unveiled a bunch of digital design templates for government. They're called the Adobe Digital Design Templates. And this is an open source package that is going to enable public sector web managers to deploy these web standards that I just brought up using our web content management system, which is called the Adobe Experience Manager, or AEM. So this is going to give AEM users the ability to create standards compliant, responsive, accessible websites that are going to leverage those latest web design trends, and it's also going to enable agile project development for these websites. So every theme component and page template and style and user-centered design is compliant with those U.S. web design standards that were established by 18F. And so the compatibility with our AEM platform, or the Adobe Experience Manager, right, that is an industry-leading web content management system that is built with all open development principles, and it's also the first FedRAMP authorized cloud service for web content management. So I highly encourage you to check those out, as well as a new project that Adobe has launched called Project Comet, which is a user experience design tool that you can sign up to enter the public beta in when that launches a little bit later this month. So this is a desktop application that allows you to design exceptional user experiences right there on your desktop. So those are my recommendations. Now let's get to the meat of our presentation, which is talking about the results of the survey that Adobe commissioned from Edelman Berland, and this was commissioned, I believe, in September and October of 2015. And we wanted to talk to American and Canadian public sector creatives in order to understand how creative communications actually impact their work, right? So this is a little bit about the methodology. We conducted it via online and phone. And so as you can see, a lot of them were in North America and a bunch in Canada as well. So these are some of the results of that survey, right? So one of the questions was around the use of consumer data and analytics and how vital that is these days in government to the creative process. So I think you can see that an overwhelming majority of designers agree that using data and analytics is very important to understanding the audience that you're trying to address. So creating in a vacuum is no longer something that is acceptable from designers. You have to understand your user, understand your audience, know who you're talking to, and be very targeted and be very personalized about how you are creating and delivering that content. And so, all of the other kind of supporting questions around here support this idea. So creative communications and design is indispensable to successful government workplaces. I think there's a much higher and growing acceptance of this idea around creative communications, but there's also an agreement that there's a counterintuitive principle that being more creative actually leads to more efficiency and enables better service. One tends to think of creativity as a process whereby you're throwing spaghetti onto the wall to see what sticks, or in a somewhat small cloistered experimental room kind of off by yourself, and that creativity is a very expensive, time-consuming, and resource-intensive process that ultimately drags down the efficiency. And so I think what you see in these polling results is that using methods of creativity, like we outlined earlier, actually makes communications more effective, and that public sector employees are able to work more efficiently and better able to achieve their mission and provide better services and tools for citizens. So I'm not sure how much of this is necessarily surprising to everyone, but I think where we start seeing the gap that we would like to bridge is between the world of business and the world of government, right? Almost all of the surveyed public sector employees agreed that government should have as big of a focus on creativity inside of the enterprise, not just for marketing and communications, but across the board, encouraging creativity, but less than half agreed that that emphasis is being put inside the workplace. So I think that's a gap that we as public sector employees and as creatives can help to bridge and can help to start creating the channel for that to happen a little bit more. Now, this is probably not too unique to government, but approval processes is seen as one of the #1 barriers to creativity. But the emphasis on productivity over creativity is also seen as a pretty big barrier. And that's why when you look at efficiency actually going up through the use of creativity and out-of-the-box thinking and iterative design and agile processes, you see productivity going up, but there's still somewhat of a stigma associated with being creative or using creativity as a tool. So I found this one pretty interesting, and I experienced it in my own work here at Adobe, is that the top driver of creativity, or the top, let's say the thing that comes across as the most creative is high quality imagery. So using high quality imagery in communications above any other, any other thing, like using social media effectively, or adopting to mobile technologies, or having a well-designed website. If you've got high quality imagery, somehow that buys a level of credibility that is not necessarily, you don't get with low resolution or poor quality, or let's say old or outdated content. But that being said, mobile is certainly changing the face of design. We all like to look at high-quality imagery wherever we happen to be, whether it's a 4K display in your movie theater or on your TV or on your mobile device. And so it's no surprise that almost everyone agrees that mobile is transforming the face of creativity and design. But interesting is how mobile devices are actually being used in the creative process itself. So it sounds like over half of the government creative surveyed are saying that they're using mobile to collaborate, and almost half of them are using mobile to actually do pieces of their content creation and capturing inspiration in the moment and on the go, whether that's photos or videos or colors or patterns or inspiration. Whatever it is, it looks like that trend is on the rise and is going to continue rising when it comes to professional creativity and taking an idea from ideation and inspiration all the way through to the finished product. So I think we've probably noted that there's a bit of room, there's that gap where increased creativity in government has a space to grow. And so when we polled these employees about, would you consider leaving your current job for one that's more creative, 41% said yes. Over half of the surveyed employees said that they don't really rate their government department or the agency or entity in general as a highly creative place. Almost half of them don't really feel like they're getting to live up to their creative potential. And over half of them don't feel that their colleagues or their teams are living up to the potential of the teams. So again, I think there is some room for increased creativity, or at least focus on this. We have work to do, to make government a place where creativity and design-led thought are natural. And so, I think there are a lot of barriers. You can probably list a bunch of them on one hand, but the approval processes, access to technology, security, staffing, training. But I think this is an interesting one, the risk-averse workplace culture, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's something that was addressed actually by one of our panelists. And so we'll talk a little bit about the workplace culture and how to kind of chip away at the workplace culture. So I think in surveying a bunch of friends and government employees and looking at this survey, I think these results are definitely reflected in the experience. But Carolyn from the 18F mentioned that, again, these are not necessarily endemic only to government. There are lots of large enterprises and organizations that have very similar internal bureaucracy to government. If you're in financial services or insurance or in pharmaceutical or medical or pick an industry that is highly regulated, and you're going to come into this type of internal bureaucracy. So this is not necessarily unique to government. And it's a little oversimplifying to say that, government doesn't get to be as creative. And it's easy to compare public sector to business and say that public sector isn't doing as well, but the truth is public sector actually has a mandate to do better than the private sector. And, because the private sector is not obligated, right? They have an obligation to the bottom line, and for them to serve low-income, low-literacy customers is not necessarily a charter or a mission statement. But as government, we have to serve everybody, which I think is why we are mandated to be even more creative than private sector, because we have a much broader audience. With everybody, the public is our audience and is our customer, and we have a bigger responsibility than private sector. So our creativity has to be even greater. And so some of the advice that came out of this survey is to leverage the technology that's available to you, right? Use available tools and look for those in your organization who are experienced, and try and figure out which tools are on the bleeding edge, which tools are maybe need to get put into mothballs, and leverage that to your best ability. Also, investing in training, education, and skills building within your organization is something that everyone, and I tour across the country to public sector folks in the state and local government market, as well as the federal and civilian, and everybody wants to be able to invest in training, right? The money is not always there, but there are a lot of options for low-cost training, and there's also just a consideration of priorities when it comes to will we actually be more efficient if we have more highly trained staff? And then the last part, or the last piece of advice, is to encourage and reward creativity, right? Allow staff to a little bit of license to think outside of the box. And so when I asked my panelists if they had considered solutions like these, so Carolyn actually mentioned, she said, this agile and iterative development process will actually help to, it actually allows failure in smaller, less risky ways, because that risk-averse culture is what government creatives and government employees in general run into the most, is that there's so many regulations that we don't want to fail and cause the system to come crashing down. So agile and iterative development processes, right, which are doing development in sprints and collecting user feedback and integrating that user feedback directly into the next sprint. So you're not building an ivory tower that turns into a house of cards when nobody actually knows how to use it. It's putting the user experience first and foremost and creating something simple and intuitive, right? That's the idea behind agile and iterative development. And so doing that with user-led research, if you fail, that means that it opens an opportunity for the user experience to improve, right? Collaborating and pulling ideas from everywhere instead of relying on the lone genius designer in the corner, right, in his or her own ivory tower, the classic genius syndrome of the designer. Design can be more collaborative, and that's a great way of making things more simple and intuitive, is being more collaborative in the practices that you put into effect. And reframing risk, again, this is all of these practices come back to reframing risk, and that's for folks to try new things. And if you evaluate what the risk is for staying the same versus actually doing something new, you see that the risk of staying the same is oftentimes much higher. And so this is a really critical one. Having persistence, continuing to ask why. Look at what the regulations that you are having difficulty overcoming, what are they actually? Right? I like that she said, why them to death, right? This is something that my 4-year-old daughter is very good at. And eventually she breaks me down, and I don't have the regulations written anywhere, and that's how she succeeds. And so I like that idea of persistence and asking to see regulations and being willing to negotiate and to continuously negotiate for new things. So as we saw in the research, we have some work to do. There is a gap in the public sector between where we would like to be with creativity and where we are. And so Adobe took the study results that I just discussed and put them together into a white paper, which you are actually able to download along with all of these slides that I'm showing you right now. That's in the downloads pod, which should be on the lower left-hand side of your Connect room, and if it's not, then it will be towards the end of the presentation. But this white paper basically goes through all of the study results and shows not only some of the great examples like the U.S. Rotunda and the architect of the Capitol, but a lot of other Adobe customers who have gone through and leveraged best practices, like we're talking about. I wish I never responded. They are leveraging Adobe solutions like the Creative Cloud and what they're doing. So the U.S. Navy is one example of a very bleeding edge studio that is using an all-digital, all-creative workflow to create digital publications, responsibly designed websites, videos, multimedia, and print publications. So they're very, they're very bleeding edge over there in Newport, Rhode Island. We have another one with the U.S. Army IMCOM, and this is the Morale, Welfare, and Recreation Unit of Army IMCOM at Fort Gordon in Georgia. And we learn about their building of mobile applications using the Adobe Creative Cloud. We also look at the Computer Sciences Corporation, or CSC, and how they were able to leverage both the Adobe Creative Cloud and Marketing Cloud to integrate a lot of their use cases together and their digital marketing efforts across all the different channels and groups that they needed to address, and how they dealt with security issues along that path. So what we also put together with that white paper are a couple of infographics that highlight many of the data points that I brought up a little bit earlier that you can kind of take home, mull over, and use as proof points if you're trying to finance maybe some skills training, or maybe change a little bit of your headcount practices to bring in folks who might have a little bit more history of creativity in their portfolio. And so another resource that Adobe makes available, besides those great white papers and infographics, are these live webinars. So you're on one of our live webinars right now, obviously, and what we do is put together ideas not just on kind of the big picture creativity, but also we drill down into the specific tools. So this coming Thursday, we actually have one about taking your document processes digital. We're also going to talk on March 17th about using the Creative Cloud in the government enterprise to have connected workflow, which I'm very excited about. And then packaging, deployment, and management of these tools for your IT department, right? A lot of times there's an argument between the end users and multimedia group and IT about which services, which capabilities, which tools are going to be available. IT can sometimes leverage security as a proof point as to why this cloud service or that desktop tool is not accessible. And so the packaging, deployment, and management webinar is targeted at IT to give them the resources they need to help creatives and those who want to be successful using Adobe's tools. And so these webinars are going to be available here at this URL. Again, you can get all of these URLs in the slides over on the left-hand side by downloading today's slides. What we also have is a great library of on-demand webinars. These are webinars that dive deeply into all of the tools that Adobe makes for creatives, such as Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop, After Effects, Premiere Pro, Muse, and Acrobat, right? All of those tools that you might use in your individual workflow. If you want to sit during your lunch hour and really digest what's the latest tips and tricks in Photoshop or in InDesign or anything like that. And these webinars are offered on a free ongoing basis. Think of it as free training for you to learn how to use these tools to your best advantage. And we have a growing library of on-demand webinars that are available for you to check out and use, and to really leverage them well. Now, we also have a portal called Adobe Learn, which, unlike the government-focused webinars that I pointed out on the previous slide, these are even kind of more high level, but what they come with are example files. So if you're familiar with lynda.com or totaltraining.com or some of these online training portfolios that allow you to download assets and start using them along with the videos, so our Adobe Learn portal has hundreds of videos on all topics and all tools, and also allows you to download assets to work along with them. So that's right there at helpx.adobe.com/learn.html. It's a great site, and it's searchable across Creative Cloud, Document Cloud, and our Marketing Cloud. It's a wonderful resource. You can spend a lot of time on there. Another resource that we have that not a lot of folks are familiar with, and I spend as much time on this as I possibly can, is a live streaming channel called Twitch. So if you're not familiar with Twitch, then you might not have a teenager at home. But for teenagers who are into video gaming, multiplayer online video gaming, there are kids on these networks who have logged hundreds and thousands of hours on the Twitch network broadcasting their live experience inside of these virtual worlds. And so Adobe last year decided we wanted to be part of the live streaming revolution that was happening, but instead of showing what video game we're playing, we're going in there and showing what Adobe application we're using, whether that's an iPad application like you see Terry White using right here. I think he's using Photoshop Sketch, or it might be Photoshop, I think it's Photoshop Fix or Mix there to work on an image of the Capitol building. So you'll find experts on web design, on illustration, on graphic design, on video, on audio. You really find a very vibrant community, and that's on twitch.tv/Adobe. I'm actually scheduled to be on there a little bit later today. I'm having my very own first session where I'm going to be showing a mobile workflow where you can take images from your phone and integrate them into the Lightroom mobile application and create a story using the Adobe Slate application. So Adobe Slate is a very easy to use tool that's available on iPad and in a web browser to create and share newsletters, reports, invitations, travel adventure stories. It's really easy to take whatever photos you might have and transform them into a beautiful visual story without having to write a single line of code. And I'll just show you really quickly as kind of a preview what I'm going to show. And so this is Adobe Slate, right? I'm signed in with my Adobe ID, right? So you can see. And so these are a bunch of the cool slates that I've made. Again, these are websites where I didn't have to write a single line of code to do anything. So if I go ahead and look at the San Francisco, right, I recently visited the city and county of San Francisco to show them all about the Adobe tools. And so I did a little city walk around the city of San Francisco, just snapping photos with my iPhone, right? I have an iPhone. You don't have to have an iPhone to do it. But what you see here is I was able to very easily create this kind of glide show look around the city of San Francisco, right? So I just took these photos with my phone, uploaded them into Lightroom Mobile, which is a very lightweight application for iOS and Android. And I was able to make this very beautiful experience, which is part slideshow, part storytelling, right? I'm able to put in copy, create header text, and tell a story, and have these great kind of transitions, right? I like those fades and transitions and stuff like that. And finally, towards the end of the day, after I'm finished and went to Coit Tower and got the sunset, the next day I went to the Capitol building, and yes, that's my beautiful face in front of the Capitol building, and presented all of this content to the folks in the city and county of San Francisco. So, as you can see, I was able to put this presentation together there live in front of the folks who were there. It's very simple to use. And on the Adobe Twitch channel at 3 o'clock Pacific time, which is a little late for you folks on the East Coast, I'm going to be showing how to do that. And one more resource, or actually a couple more resources that I wanted to let you guys know about, right? So across America, there are Adobe events called Creative Jams. And these are events, competitive events, right? We had one in Washington, D.C. last year, and they are happening across the country. I believe there was just one in Miami last week, and there's going to be another one this week, where you get together in a room with 300 other designers or creatives. It's a great networking opportunity, and there's a competition amongst teams of 2 designers, right? So you've got a team, 10 teams of 2 competing on a theme, and you have luminaries from the design community in that city come and speak in a kind of a TED Talk type of format for 10 or 15 minutes. And then once the TED Talks are over, the competitors come up and present their designs. So it's very interactive. It's a great networking opportunity. You learn a little bit, you have fun, and there's always food, and it's always in a very interesting location. So I want to encourage you to check out the Adobe Creative Jams. It's adobecreativejams.com. If you are looking for trainers, this is a question that I get all the time around Adobe. If you're looking for somebody to train not only on best practices in creativity and design, but also on specific Adobe applications, we actually have a partner finder where you can search on your location, on which training method you're interested in, on which product you're looking for, and what type of trainer you would like. And so I'm just looking right now in the DC area on here, and you can see there's a list that keeps going of all the different trainers in the DC area. But that portal is available here. Again, everything is in today's slides. And then for our government customers who need to understand how our tools, how Adobe's tools, and how the world of accessibility plays into the creation of content, so we actually have a product page that allows you to go over all of the VPATs, or the voluntary product accessibility templates, for the Adobe tool sets. And there are also tutorials, resources, a feedback form, and a special section about PDF accessibility to jumpstart your agency's capability to create 508 compliant and WCAG2 compliant documents, content, websites, etc. So that is the bulk of my presentation for today. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.